Jason, I heard that you've cleaned out several lockers in your career. How many times have you cleaned that out?
Well, it's a challenging topic because it's certainly not anything that I would want to seem as though I was bragging about or a badge that I would wear proudly. And it's become all too common. And I would be foolish to think that there could be somebody watching that hasn't experienced it either on a personal level or a professional level. But we've had 5 suicides in the district that I work in. I have a good friend who does a lot of work in the suicide space out in Wyoming. He had 13 in 2 years in his district. Pretty depressed community, but we know that the statistics around suicide and suicide attempts and also anxiety and depression and self-harm tell us that there's going to be more. It's on the rise. It's not getting any better anytime soon. So this war on hopelessness couldn't be any more relevant or important.
I just read a statistic this morning. It said 9 years between 2007 and 2015, I think the attempts went from 580,000 to 1.2 million in our 5 to 18-year-olds. Like most people just shake their head at 5-year-olds. And one thing that I share with middle schoolers is since 2007, that number has doubled in middle schoolers. And really the number one thing to take the life of a 10 to 14-year-old in North America has always been car accidents. And that number was just outpaced by their own hands last year, the year before. I think it teeters back and forth right now. I couldn't give you the exact number at this point. And shifting it back to Jason here, and this maturation of Sweethearts and Heroes, I'm always very careful to say it did not start through suicide. Not one bit. It started through the fact that Jason was one of my original 16th century bullies. I went to give back to him in front of all of his kids, and that's how it started. It kind of morphed into that, and we always talk about one of our parenting pillows, teacher pillows. They're very similar to pillars. We just call them pillows for a specific reason. It's a marathon, not a sprint, and that's what we do when we work with young people. And all too often we want to sprint them over the finish line. And Jason, I'm going to turn this back on him because he kind of developed this because we call it the Evan to Devon story. And this is when the discovery of the work that we were doing with creating Sweethearts and Heroes lends itself extremely well to these tragic situations that he's been involved with. And maybe if Evan had more Sweethearts and Heroes in his life, he wouldn't have done what he did.
Yeah, there was two boys in my middle school in my classes, in my phys ed classes, that had taken their own lives. And then Evan was a high school student, a junior, who was on my wrestling team. And the 2 other suicides I didn't have direct contact with, but I certainly knew of them. They were in our school community. But to be that close to those stories and those students and experience it, is probably the greatest professional challenge that I've faced, personal challenge as well. And then to have it be one of my wrestlers when I was coaching was extremely challenging. But around this topic of suicide, we're not suicide experts, but what I didn't realize is that as a phys ed teacher and coach, being close to Evan, I was asked to help with grief counseling the day after he had taken his own life. And so I was quickly thrown into an environment where I was, a support person, and gladly, but very nervously entered that space. And it happened to be in our high school library where kids were grieving. Without going into too much detail, I did pretty good at it. I was able to start some conversations and have some memories shared and get some people, talking and grieving in a healthy way. And our administrators had a problem that I hadn't thought of, is these were kids that were grieving in our library for the loss of Evan, but there were still classes in session that Evan was supposed to be in. So, by this time it's third period and then fourth period and fifth period. And, if you're a student who maybe wasn't close with Evan, but you knew that, he was in your fifth period class, you probably were least looking forward to that, going to that fifth period class. So they asked me, we have this issue, this, dilemma. We need someone to maybe go and talk to his classes and help each class. So I kind of, was asked to volunteer to walk his schedule the rest of the day. And I'll say that was one of the most powerful professional development experiences, the most that I had ever had. And it was, shortly after I started wearing these Sweethearts and Heroes lenses. It was about 3 years into our development, 2.5 years in. And I remember calling Tom at the end of the day and I said, I got this thing figured out. I said, it isn't depression, which I didn't really know if Evan was depressed or not. It isn't mental health, because I truly couldn't tell you what his mental health was like. I just knew he was a pretty good boy. He was on my team. He came and did everything I asked him to. It wasn't necessarily a parenting or a family situation that was adverse or challenging. It wasn't something, he wasn't bullying. It was the lack of Sweethearts and Heroes that was in his life to give him hope and take action for him. And the only reason I kind of had that epiphany was because I looked in the faces of each class and I saw guilt. And if I looked in the mirror, I saw guilt in my own face. And that's what suicide does to us, unfortunately, is it makes us feel guilty. And we have this would've, could've, should've mindset. And, the kids crying that had unfinished projects with him, and I could sense where his seat was in the class. It was quite profound. And even the teacher who wouldn't come into the classroom, that stood in the threshold of the doorway, kind of, hoping just for the minutes to tick by so that they could get out of this really awkward, uncomfortable, and to no fault of the teacher. I mean, I was counting minutes too. It's just really challenging day for everyone. But I think that at the end of that day, I just said, we got to make sure that all those kids know what they would have, could have, or should have done is what they should do every day. And that's what a sweetheart or hero does. They have this heightened superhero awareness, and they have this heightened ability to jump into action or give someone hope by just a kind gesture or compassionate, interaction. So that was really for me, because a lot of people think that it's about, suicide is about kids are mean today and bullying and social media, and certainly all those things kind of fall into this dynamic milkshake or recipe of hopelessness, but it's hopelessness. And the only thing that beats hopelessness is more kindness, more love, more compassion, and we classify that all into hope and action.